Hi, hello, I'm Ever, and welcome back to Everso. Today I will be reading chapter 11 and chapter 12 of the fic The Clairvoyant Boy by Marilyn Mayhem on AR3. Chapter 11 The Ghost of an Education. Are you sure you want to do this? Oboro asked, placing a cool hand on Izuku's shoulder. I know you're terrified. You could always find a different way to do this. Izuku shook his head. Last time I ignored an issue like this in 1A was attacked by villains. I won't sit by again, even if it means I will get expelled. He really wanted to take Oboro's words to heart and do this a better way, but the guilt eating away at Izuku's stomach was too large to ignore. So late last night, he had compiled a bunch of evidence against two of his classmates. A lot of the information was about Shoda's death and the reason the bully should be held responsible. He had also spent a large chunk of time coming up with a believable lie for why he had dug for all this information. Oboro had been extremely concerned when he walked into Izuku's house to see him practicing his lies in the mirror. It's safe to say the ghost quickly forced Izuku into bed, worried that the boy might have hit his breaking point. But Izuku was still nervous. He didn't know how discriminatory the principal was. The UA website did say they had a no bullying policy, but most schools just added those for show. Oboro moved his hand to Izuku's back, rubbing small circles in an act of comfort. Izuku was extremely grateful for the ghost. He didn't know if he would be able to handle this alone. Raising a shaky hand, Izuku took a deep breath. He lowered his fist to the door, a file strongly clutched in his other hand. Before his hand made contact, the door swung open, startling Izuku so much he physically jumped back. Inside the office, Nezu sat at a tall desk chair that was placed in front of a long desk. The principal's black, beady eyes scanned Izuku, who was sweating under the intimidating gaze. "Hello," the Kamiya chimed. "What can I do for you today?" The smile placed on his face was terrifying. Izuku swallowed before taking a few steps into the office. His grip on the folder tightened. I'm Izuku Midoriya, and I have some information on a few of my classmates that I think you might be interested in. One of Nezu's eyebrows raised as he eyed the wrinkled folder. Oh, and what would that be? Using the hand not gripping the papers, Izuku nervously scratched at the back of his neck. I was just reading through the code of contract, and there are 3 things in there that they have violated, and some of the stuff is pretty bad, so I thought that I should do something about it. Nezu nodded and then held out a hand, paw motioning for the folder. Izuku complied with his request, sliding the folder into Principal's grasp before pulling his own hand away. Oboro gave Izuku's shoulder a light squeeze in support as Nezu began to scan the papers. Izuku could feel the sweat on his neck double as the Principal's read. His expression unchanging. Nezu's eyes widened a small fraction somewhere in the middle. Izuku assumed he was reading the information about Shoda. The awkward silence was broken when Nezu cleared his throat. This is very alarming information, Midoriya. Do you mind telling me what exactly compelled you to dig this up? Izuku swallowed. This was the part he had practiced. Staring at his shoes, Izuku pulled at his fingers. I knew Shoda, not very well, but I met her a few times. We were both quirkless, so we understood each other. When she took her life, I was really upset. She was never the kind of girl I would expect to do something like that. And then I saw her brother in my first aid class, and I just felt so guilty. I wanted to do something to get back at those people who had wronged her, and when I found out how many perpetrators were in my class, I just couldn't stand it, so I did that. Izuku weakly mentioned for the photo before looking down again. He didn't want the principal to catch him lying. Taking pity on the boy, Nozu nodded. I understand. Thank you for trusting me with this, Midoriya. I'll make sure the respective parties are punished accordingly. Thank you, Izuku mumbled, deeply bowing to the principal. He quickly turned to the head and scurried out. The two teens made their way down a few hallways before Izuku finally snapped and turned to Oboro. That was the scariest moment of my life, Izuku said, grabbing Oboro's shoulders. His racing heart slowed slightly when Oboro laughed. I bet! But you handled it like a champ. If I hadn't talked to Shota before, I would have 100% believed you. If I hadn't talked to Shota before, I would have 100% believed you. And you even told me you were planning to lie earlier this morning. Izuku huffed in amusement, remembering how he had warned the ghost of his plan. The memory of Oboro's stunned expression would be cherished for so many years to come. The pair was interrupted by Shota, who was waving at the two from across the hallway. Oboro waved back immediately. Izuku scanned his surroundings first before he also waved. The younger ghost approached them, her tether nowhere in sight. Hi guys, she smiled, landing on the ground so she no longer towered over the living boy. Where have you been? I didn't see you in the cafeteria. We don't normally eat in the cafeteria, Izuku explained. It's super crowded, so we can talk with each other without me looking like a psycho. Shinzo doesn't like eating in the cafeteria either, so when I eat with him and outside. Shota nodded. Okay, cool. I was just going to thank you for helping me out. I don't know what you told the principal, but the fact that you at least wanted to try means a lot to me. Izuku shot the ghost a warm smile. It's no problem at all. Are you planning on sticking around, or will you move on? It really depends, Shota shrugged. If your plan works, then I'll go find somewhere else to hound. But those two were jerks in middle school, so if it doesn't, then I'll probably stick around. Someone has to teach those two a lesson. Izuku nodded in understanding. All right. I assume Nezu will be calling them into his office soon, so you might want to stick by them. Taking Izuku's advice, Shota moved to go find her tethers. It was nice meeting you two. Thanks for keeping me company, Oboro. She waved while falling backwards down the hallway. Yeah, no problem. Oboro waved back, a wide grin on his face. Izuku smiled as well, his grin slightly smaller than Oboro's. See you around, Shota. Call me Kay, you've earned it, she said, pointing to Izuku. Nodding, Izuku waved back. I will. See you around, Kay. With that, Kay turned around and floated down the hallway, no doubt looking for her tethers. Izuku and Oboro smiled at each other, pride but also sadness written across their faces. They know Kay would not be returning. When the sports festival finally arrived, the whispers of two 1C students getting expelled died down, instead replaced with the confessions of excitement and nervousness for the upcoming event. Izuku was one of the nervous students. It didn't matter how many times Oboro tried to ease his nerves, he was still teeming with anxiety. It's not like you lose anything if it all goes wrong. You could finish dead last and nothing bad would happen. It's not like you're aiming for the hero course. Oboro rationalized, attempting to ease at least some of Izuku's concerns. Whispering out of the corner of his mouth, Izuku crossed his arms. I might not be, but Shinzo is. I don't want to be the reason he doesn't get in. Oboro raised his eyebrows. You have like 20 backup plans! And those are just the ones you've written down. I know you have a few more up in that brain of yours. The ghost jabbed a finger at Izuku's forehead. I don't think you've got to be worried. Shooting a harsh glare at Oboro, Izuku massaged his forehead. It's not like I can control my nerves. Oboro winced. Okay, fair. Do you need anything from me? Izuku perked up at that. Actually, yeah, I've been meaning to ask you, but do you think you would mind helping me during some of the events? Everyone else is using the quirks, so it makes sense that I use mine. Oh, you want to cheat? I didn't think you would stoop so low, Izuku. I guess I was wrong. Oboro teased, smirking at the younger teen. Sputtering, Izuku whipped around to glare at the ghost. It's not cheating! I've read the rulebook and nowhere does it say that people with secret quirks aren't allowed to use them. Oboro laughed before patting Izuku on the back. Chill, I'm just teasing. I know it's not cheating. I would be pumped to help you. Playfully punching Oboro in the shoulder, Izuku grumbled. You're a jerk, and you know that. Who's a jerk? Shinzo emerged from the doorway, raising an eyebrow at Izuku. Quickly moving to do damage control, Izuku sheepishly rubbed at the back of his neck. No one. I'm just talking to myself. It happens when I get nervous. Accepting that answer, Shinzo nodded. Fair enough. I personally can't sit still. I'm a little freaked out right now. Trying to lighten the mood, Izuku laughed. Hey, I get it. But just remember, we have like 20 backup plans, and those are just the ones we wrote down. I have even a few more up in my head. Hey! I came up with that! You just can't steal my advice and give it out as your own! Oboro complained, throwing his hands up in the air. Rolling his eyes, Shinzo snorted. Of course you do. Good to know I'm in the right hands, though. Anyways, we should get going. It's about to start. Izuku nodded before following Shinzo down the hallway. They made their way to Wanzi's waiting room, which was filled with nervous chatter. Anxiety gaining the better of him, Izuku subconsciously pushed himself into Oboro's side. The ghost grinned before wrapping an arm around the shorter boy. What do you guys think the first event is going to be? A black-haired boy asked. Izuku was pretty sure his name was Itachi Fujiwara. Shinzo led Izuku over to a table, separate from the clump of students in the center, but close enough so they could hear the conversation. I'm not sure. The girl with the ship mutation charm. Her name was Hino Emina. I really hope it's not like a maze like last year. I bet those things are teeming with spiders. She shuddered, her ears flicking back with emotion. I don't really care what it was, Akemichi Madoka answered, her puffy braids swinging. I don't plan on getting past the first match. I hate exercise. She placed a finger on her chin. But it would be cool if it was similar to those wipe-up courses they would televise in the pre-quirk era. That would be fun to watch. A chorus of agreement echoed in the room. Izuku was just confused. He wasn't very knowledgeable on pre-quirk movies. Izuku raised an eyebrow at Oboro, hoping for an explanation. Do you not know what a wipe-out course is? Oboro's eyes widened, and Izuku shook his head. They were these really popular obstacle courses, and people didn't have quirks to do them with, so it was a lot harder. Most of the show was just people wiping out, which is why it was so funny. Using two of his fingers, Oboro mimicked someone jumping between platforms, as well as them falling. Cool. Izuku signed back. He was startled when the door was flung open with a tiny robot.
Please make your way to the entrance tunnel,
it droned, a red dot blinking at the top of it. Class 1C watched in silence while the tiny robot turned around and left the room, only splurging into action when the class president called out, "You heard the robot! Everyone up and at him!" The chair Izuku had been sitting on screeched when he pushed it back in. Izuku grimaced at the loud sound. "You ready?" Shinzo asked from his side. Taking a moment to breathe deeply, Izuku smiled. "As ready as I can be. You have the railgun?" Shinzo nodded and pulled the tip of the weapon out of his pocket, just enough for Izuku to see the purple stripes painting on. After spending an entire day getting an above-average amount of knowledge on how to use the railgun, Shinzo had insisted that Izuku use the color purple to paint it. After one of his usual endeavors, Izuku had picked up a small can of purple paint and immediately went home to paint the thing. Oboro had not been happy when he met up with Izuku to walk him to school and found him covered head to toe in paint. "Great. Try not to use that for the first event if you don't have to. Stick to the other stuff." Izuku waved at Shinzo's stuffed pockets, which were no doubt filled with the various gadgets Izuku had gifted him. "Sounds good." The two teens began to make their way down the hallway, Oboro trailing behind them. When they caught up to their class, Izuku was squinting, the bright sight shining into his eyes. Oboro noticed this and offered his help. "I can fold out and block the sun for you. I don't know how well it works, but it might do something." Waiting for Izuku to nod before going through with his idea, Oboro floated above Izuku's classmates, positioning himself so that he covered the entire sun. Izuku let out a breath of relief when the harsh light left his eyes. "Whoa, Midoriya, how are you doing that?" Hino asked from his side, her eyes watering. "Isn't the sun like totally hurting your eyes?" That caught the attention of several classmates, and heads turned to look at him. I... Izuku risked a pleading glance at Oboro. The girl just shrugged. "I used to stare at the sun when I was a child. I've grown immune," he blurted, his panic getting the better of him. His classmates gave him an odd look before accepting his answer and turning to the stadium. Oboro flashed Izuku a thumbs up. The younger teen had to suppress a groan. The sun stayed out of Izuku's eyes until his class had to enter the stadium and Oboro returned to his side. The amount of sweat on Izuku's neck seemed to double when he saw the massive crowd. Sure, he knew the event was going to be huge, but the reality of seeing thousands of people looking at his class really freaked him out. The fact that Izuku knew thousands more were watching from the TVs did nothing to ease his worries. Class 1C joined the heroic students in the middle of the arena, watching as the other classes were introduced and joined them. When Midnight called Katsuki up to give the opening speech, Izuku buried his face in his hand and suppressed a groan. "What's wrong?" Oboro asked from above him. The crowd was too tight for him to stand beside Izuku without giving someone frostbite. Izuku tilted his head to the side slightly, just enough so he could see Oboro from the corner of his eye. "That kid has the biggest ego imaginable. He's going to say something so centered." Right on cue, Katsuki cleared his throat into the mic. "I'm just gonna say I am going to win." Silence hung over the crowd for a second, before loud cheers of disagreement chorused through the arena. Izuku covered his ears to hide away from some of the noise. "Yeesh, you are right. You know that kid or something?" Oboro crossed his arms over his chest and leaned backwards, as if he was some sort of hammock. Lifting his hands from his ears, Izuku signed back. Yeah, I've known him since I was a little kid. We were childhood best friends. The shouting came to a halt when Mina cracked her whip. The students turned towards the screen mounted on the wall. A wheel of different challenges was being projected. Izuku heard a small cheer of excitement while he was reading the triangle labeled Wipeout Course. A few kids slammed their heads on their thighs, mimicking a drum while the wheel spun. Izuku grabbed at the long sleeves covering his arms as he watched the option flicker by. Eventually the wheel slowed, landing on the obstacle race. Murmur erupted from the gathering students, but were quickly put a stop when Mina cracked her whip again. "All right, students, make your way over to that gate over there," she called out, pointing to one of the long tunnels exiting the arena. Izuku looked up at Oboro before he made his way over to where the other UA students were gathering. He gazed down the long tunnel. He already knew the cramped quarters would be a challenge to get through. He took a deep breath and prepared himself for the event to start. As soon as the buzzer rang, Izuku hoisted himself up onto people's shoulders. He made sure to grab Shinzo's shoulder and bring him up towards 2. Class 1C had been put in the back of the tunnel, and just pushing through would take too long. Izuku's idea turned out to be the right one, as a beam of ice shot out and multiple students' feet were sealed to the ground. Izuku and Shinzo emerged out from the other side of the tunnel. Oboro floated beside the two. "You've got to be kidding me. Robots again?" Shinzo complained while he got a good look at the next obstacle. None of the items in their pockets would be useful, so they had to improvise. Izuku swiftly scanned his surroundings, spotting a large piece of metal hiding in the wreckage. That would be useful for bashing. He ran over to grab it, also nabbing a steel pole to give to Shinzo. Izuku groaned when he grabbed the sheet of metal. It was extremely heavy, but Izuku knew it would be useful in getting past the giant robots. He ran back to Shinzo and offered him the pole. The other boy stared at him for a moment before clutching it in his grip. The two ran towards the robots. Shinzo pulled his arms backwards before swinging at the metal. Izuku raised his chunk of metal over his head and slammed it down on any obstacles. A robot with giant 3 painted on the front spun in beside Izuku, using the lasers on his face to burn the boy. The Oboro gasped and used his body to block the next round of lasers, while Izuku swept the robot's legs from under it. "Let's go," Izuku said to Shinzo, grabbing the boy's wrist and pulling him along. He didn't drop the metal and glared at Shinzo when he attempted to leave his pipe behind. The two stopped when they reached a large pit. Ropes were strung in between rocky platforms. Izuku turned to Shinzo and ripped off one of the sleeves on his shirt. Shinzo opened his mouth to question the younger boy, but closed it when Izuku used the sleeve to tie the pipe to Shinzo's back. Izuku used a few trace wires on his sheet of metal to wear it like a bagpipe before he grabbed onto the ropes and started to shimmy across. The sweat on his hands made his grip weak, and he felt queasy looking down, but he didn't want to let Shinzo down, so he would do whatever it took to place in this race. The weight of the rope shifted when Shinzo began to dangle from it. Izuku was to slip when Oboro grabbed his arm. "I got you," the ghost said before winking at the other boy. "If you weren't single-handedly keeping me from falling out of the pit, I would smack you," Izuku whispered at the ghost, shooting him a playful glare. The grip Oboro had hand on Izuku loosened when The ghost laughed, but Oboro didn't let go. When the three reached the other end of the cavern, Oboro helped pull Izuku up. Izuku smiled at him before helping Shinzo, who looked incredibly shaken. "You good?" Izuku tilted his head to the side. Shinzo just gave a shaky nod. He looked like he was about to hurl. "All right, let's go then." The two continued to run, Oboro still trailing behind. They passed a person or two, but were suddenly forced to stop as they came to a giant minefield. Students were slowly making their way across. There were at least 50 people already on the field. If Izuku and Shinzo wanted to make it through this round, they would have to pass a huge handful of these people. Shinzo also seemed to come to this conclusion, as he was staring at Izuku with wide eyes. The younger teen looked around, trying to come up with a way for them to quickly pass through the crowd. Izuku's eyes stopped when he noticed one of the mines sticking out of the dirt. "I have an idea," Izuku whispered before crouching down at the dirt. He pulled the metal off his back and began to dig the mines up, collecting them in a giant pile. Shinzo joined him on the ground and began to dig with his pipe, softening the dirt so Izuku could push it around easier. When Izuku had collected the mines in the area, he pulled Shinzo up. "Grab on," he told the purple boy, hurting his gaze to show the seriousness of the matter. When Shinzo's hands were secured on the metal, Izuku began to run. Shinzo followed suit. "Jump!" Izuku called to the other boy. The two jumped, and Izuku shifted his weight so the metal was facing the ground. Shinzo yelled in alarm when the mine exploded, and they launched through the air, a trail of pink smoke following them. "Midoriya, are you crazy?" Shinzo yelled over the wind, grabbing Izuku's gym strip with his bare hand. Izuku laughed, the wind whipping through his hair, giving him a meaning look. "Probably," he yelled back. The two passed whoever was in first. Izuku heard the sound of familiar explosions trying to catch up. "Get ready to jump," Izuku told Shinzo, shifting his grip to the wire hanging off the makeshift magic carpet. "What?" Shinzo asked in alarm, his eyes blown wide. Izuku ignored him and instead focused on the two competitors that were quickly approaching. He reared his arms back and called to Shinzo. "Jump!" No longer questioning Izuku's methods, Shinzo jumped. That gave Izuku the freedom to flip around and slap the metal into the ground, blasting away Katsuki and another boy and propelling Izuku and Shinzo further. The two 1C students tumbled into the ground, but Izuku quickly rolled and gained his footing. Izuku grabbed Shinzo's wrist to pull him up before the two started sprinting towards the finish line. Shinzo stumbled on the harsh ground a few times, but Izuku was quick to yank him back up to continue the run. The two kept running, not even stopping when the harsh lights of the sun assaulted their eyeballs. Oboro assisted in blocking out the sun once more, which meant Izuku could see the finish line right as he and Shinzo crossed it. Loud cheering echoed in the stadium as the two boys stopped to catch their breath. Izuku could barely hear the sound of other students finishing over the noise. Both 1C students smiled at each other. Oboro was grinning as well. The ghost ruffled Izuku's hair, which Shinzo glanced at briefly before blaming it on the wind. "Nice job," the ghost praised. "Never do that again because it scared the crickets out of me, but still, good job." Izuku hid a snort of a laugh with a cough. "Crickets?" he signed with his free hand, briefly blushing in embarrassment. Oboro rubbed at the back of his neck. "My mom used to say silly things like that all the time. I guess some of it just stuck." Smiling, Izuku patted Oboro on the back of his shoulder. "That's cute. Who knows, maybe I will slip it into my vocabulary. I could try a phase or two while we on patrol." Izuku removed his hand when he noticed Shinzo giving him an odd look. I can't believe we actually did that. Shinzo had his hands on his knees, and he was breathing harshly. Izuku laughed, the adrenaline making everything 10 times funnier. He only stopped to regulate his breathing when he noticed the edges of his vision darkening. The good mood didn't last long, as Shinzo had noticed the blistering burn on Izuku's arm. Without warning, Shinzo grabbed the younger boy's arm, scanning the burn and scars surrounding it. Izuku yanked his arm back in surprise, eyes blown wide in panic. "What did you do to your arm?" Shinzo asked, pointing at the wound. Izuku took a minute to compose himself before he responded. "I just burned it a little. It's not bad. I'll be okay." Shinzo didn't look convinced. "Are you sure you don't want to go to see a recovery girl before the next event begins?" "I'm sure. It doesn't even hurt," Izuku assured, shaking his arm as proof. Shinzo looked like he wanted to argue further, but he was interrupted by Midnight's whip crack again. The pro hero went on to show a video of Izuku and Shinzo crossing the finish line, making sure to zoom up on the part where their feet crossed the finish line. The video revealed that Izuku had been the first to cross the finish line, so he was awarded 10 million points for the next round. Izuku tensed when he felt many eyes lock onto him. Oboro wrapped Izuku into his shoulder in silent comfort. The hands stayed while the other teams were revealed. With the eyes never leaving him, Izuku wanted to crawl into a hole and die. Shinzo smiled at him to try and provide some comfort, but it wasn't working. The way Katsuki was glaring at him wasn't helping. Izuku could tell he was going to regret this. Chapter 12. The Ghost of a Boy's Wordview. Izuku sat on top of 3 people, a white headband tied around his forehead. He was rather surprised when he and Shinzo had ended up with a full team. He hadn't expected 2 others to want to join up with them, especially since they were not Hero Corps students. When a pink-haired girl had approached Izuku demanding he let her on his team, he had blurted yes in surprise. She said her name was May, and that she wanted to be on their team so people could see her amazing babies. Izuku was pretty sure she was talking about her inventions. There was another student that had approached them, a bird-headed boy that had yet to find a group. Izuku let him join their group without hesitance, quizzing the boy on his quirk. He ended up explaining that his name was Tokoyami Fumikage and that he had a sentient shadow dwelling inside him. At first, Izuku had thought that the boy might just have depression, but that was before a shadow creature emerged from Tokoyami's back. Izuku had asked Oboro to help them out as well. The ghost could block a few emitters' attacks, like the laser beams from the sparkly boy. He could also provide another pair of hands to help nab other headbands, as well as holding on to their own. The 4 had discussed a plan in great detail, and Izuku felt more than ready to tackle the next round. However, that didn't stop him from flinching whenever he heard the popping of Bakugo's explosions. The buzzer sounded through the arena, and the teams took off, a huge handful of them heading towards Izuku's team. "Quick, the boots!" Izuku called to May. The girl cackled before clicking a button. Then all 4 team members burst into the sky. Oboro yelped when the group took off before glaring at Izuku. "What's with you and flying through the air? You do know that is extremely dangerous." Izuku smirked at the ghost. "What can I say?" he sighed. "I like being up high. It's a great vantage point." When Oboro's glare only hardened, he continued. "Don't act like you're any different. You do flips in the air all the time." "That's different!" Oboro defended. "I'm not at risk of falling and losing my life. You are." He jabbed Izuku in the chest. The younger boy wobbled slightly. "I'll be fine. If I fall, I'm certain someone would catch me. We are in a school for heroes. There are dozens of hero wannabes that wouldn't hesitate to rescue someone, and none of them know I'm quirkless, so I'm sad." Oboro only frowned. Izuku would have further argued his point, but he was interrupted by a wave of ice. He heard Shinzo yelp as his foot was encased in the crystals. Panicking, Izuku whipped out the mini flamethrower he had in his pocket and shot it at Shinzo's foot. Izuku rushed to shut off the weapon when he could see only a thin layer of ice, afraid of burning Shinzo's foot. The purple teen jerked his ankle out of the ice prison, and the team shot out of the way of another fast-approaching glacier. Shinzo's eyes widened slightly when he registered the flamethrower. Mei looked delighted. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. Izuku shot back a sheepish smile. "I need something to defend myself. I built these where you were practicing with the—" Oboro rushed to put a hand over Izuku's mouth, stopping him from spilling their plan to anyone within earshot. It looked like Shinzo wanted to reply, but he was forced to look back down when another team fired at them. Izuku mumbled a quick thanks to Oboro before grabbing 2 small bombs from his pockets. The flamethrower was useful in a way, but it also weakened Dark Shadow. Izuku didn't mind that much, as he had prepared a few slime bombs the night prior. "Shinzo, catch!" Izuku called down to the boy, waiting till they had locked eyes to throw the glittering orb. Shinzo raised an eyebrow in question, Izuku mimicking throwing a ball as an answer. Shinzo grinned while he realized the purpose of the orb. The purple boy reared an arm back and chucked it at the nearest and closest group. Mei's face lit up in wonder when the bomb exploded in a mess of sparkly pink slime. The teams caught in the below collapsed to the ground. Izuku threw the other bomb, stopping himself from cackling in delight when it hit Bakugo's group front and center. Mei, however, did not catch the memo and started laughing at the team. A quiet buzzer sounded, letting the competitors know that the match was halfway over. Izuku leaned down so his teammates could hear him and began to whisper. "Who's ready for phase 2? Tokoyami and Shinzo nodded. Mei pouted before also nodding. Izuku raised back to his natural height and began to undo the knots at the back of his head. Everyone in the arena seemed to freeze, watching as the boy slipped the 10 million point sash off his head and dangled it over the ground. Tension was strung high in the air when Izuku dropped the sash onto the ground. And then, just like a bow with its string tightened so much, the tension snapped. Every mobile team in the arena raced towards the bandana. Izuku's team dove out of the way. Hands snagged headbands as they slid by. Oboro even pitched in to grab a headband or two. The crowd made it easy for the former first place team to snag headbands without being noticed, and all the teams were too focused on the 10 million points to notice their own points being stolen. Izuku's team emerged from the crowd with at least a dozen headbands in their arms. The points were passed up to Izuku, who slipped them around his neck. Mei cackled again, stealing the attention of a team that hadn't bothered to go for the 10 million points. Monoma sat on top of the 3 other 1B students. Izuku recognized them from his first aid class. The only other person Izuku knew by name was Tsuburaba, who was leading the 3 team members. "It looks like someone stole our strategy," Monoma grinned sadistically, "and then got more points than we did. That just won't do." Izuku didn't have any time to analyze that sentence before Team Monoma came rushing at them. Tokoyami was able to spur Izuku's team onto moving before they were hit, but Monoma was still able to brush his hand against Izuku's bare arm. Izuku's eyes widened as he made contact with the boy. He had seen him fighting with Bakugo earlier. Both boys had been hitting each other with explosions. At first, Izuku assumed they just had similar quirks, but if they did, Monoma wouldn't have set something off when he touched Izuku, which meant he had some sort of copying quirk. Monoma's eyes widened when they landed on Oboro, who was floating beside Izuku. Time seemed to slow as Oboro realized Monoma could see him. "You can see me," the ghost accused. Monoma stiffly nodded. Izuku tapped Oboro's sleeve to get his attention before signing something at the ghost. Oboro watched Izuku sign before turning back to Monoma to deliver the message. "We can explain more later. Just leave it alone for now. It won't help you to win this battle." Monoma nodded. His teammates shot him a worried look. With a slightly shaky voice, Monoma said, "It's blank. Keep going." Tsuburaba and the other members of Team Monoma shot each other with confused looks before they ran off. Monoma still appearing very shaken. Izuku could imagine how jarring that could be. Watching another human appear out of thin air was probably terrifying, especially since Oboro had been hovering above the ground. "What was that about?" Shinzo asked, raising an eyebrow at Izuku. The smaller boy swallowed the lump in his throat. "I'm not sure. I think he tried to copy my quirk." "Ah," Shinzo huffed. He knew that Izuku didn't have a quirk to copy, which would explain why Monoma was so thrown off. The team gathered their bearings to make another move when the buzzer sounded, spooking Izuku so badly that he tumbled off of his teammates into the sand. Oboro yelled in surprise before diving to catch the boy, but he didn't make it in time, resulting in Izuku getting a face full of dirt. "Midoriya, are you okay?" Shinzo asked, crouching down beside him. Izuku was grateful when Shinzo kept his hands away. The loud shouts of midnight announcing the winners filled the arena. "I'm fine," Izuku said, raising an arm up to further prove his point. That didn't do anything but jostle his burn, which caused Izuku to wince. Now that the shock of Izuku falling had worn off, Oboro was cackling. "Are you sure?" the ghost asked between giggles. "That sounded like it seriously hurt." Izuku swatted in Oboro's general direction, oblivious to the concerned glazes his classmates shared. "Do we need to take him to the nurse?" Tokoyami asked Shinzo, only slightly twitching in surprise when Izuku shot up from his position to the ground. "I'm fine," Izuku repeated, only slightly dizzy from sitting up so fast. He slowly got to his feet, brushing the sand off of his pants. "I feel great. I don't need a nurse." Tokoyami seemed to accept this answer. Shinzo looked skeptical and made like she couldn't care less. Shifting his attention to the board, Izuku clued in to what Midnight was saying, trying his best to ignore the worried glances Oboro kept shooting his way. Izuku's team ended up placing second, first place going to Team Todoroki. They must have been the ones who nabbed 10 million points. Bakugo's team was third, and Monoma's was in fourth. The next activity was introduced, one-on-one battles. Izuku sighed in relief. There wasn't anything too complex about the next challenge, so there shouldn't be any complications with their plan. The relief quickly turned into dread when Midnight announced the hour-long break. Izuku could already feel Monoma's eyes burning holes into the back of his head. Oboro grimaced in sympathy. "Can he still see you?" Izuku sighed, keeping his back turned so Monoma couldn't see his hands. Oboro shook his head. "I don't think so. Pretty sure there is a time limit or something. Or maybe he can only use one quirk at a time. I tried waving at him a few times, but he didn't even glance in my direction." Nodding, Izuku took a deep breath. "Alright, I'm going to go talk to him," he said in a whisper, not wanting to catch the attention of his classmates. His trek towards Monoma was interrupted by Shinzo. "Where are you going?" Shinzo raised an eyebrow. Not wanting to lie to his new friend, Izuku pointed at Monoma. "I need to talk to him. He tried to copy my quirk." Shinzo nodded in understanding. "Want some backup? I won't be afraid to punch the guys if he starts shit." He cracked his knuckles from emphasis. Desperately shaking his head, Izuku jabbed a finger at Shinzo's chest. "Don't you dare! You can actually get expelled for beating someone up. Blackmail is the best way to go. Besides, I don't think he's going to do anything. I just need to make sure he won't tell anyone." Casting one more look at Monoma, Shinzo sighed. "Okay, but if you're not at our meeting place in 20 minutes, I'm going to look for you." Izuku gave a determined nod before pushing past Shinzo and walking towards Monoma. He waved a hand at the boy, motioning for him to join him down the hallway. "Follow me," he said when Monoma didn't move. The blonde quickly moved into action, following Izuku down the unoccupied hallway. The two walked in silence, only the sound being their sneakers hitting the floor echoing through the hallway. Even Oboro was uncharacteristically quiet. Not that it affected Monoma in the slightest. When Izuku was positive they had gotten far enough to have their conversation uninterrupted, he stopped. It took a moment for Monoma to realize Izuku had stopped walking, but when he did, he slowed across the opposite wall. "So, are you going to explain what had happened back there?" Monoma asked, crossing his arms. "I will explain if you promise to listen," Izuku replied. He didn't want to be called crazy yet again. The fact that Monoma had seen Oboro might help him prove his point, but the fear still lingered, no matter how many times Oboro told himself that. The last time he had told anyone alive about his ability, it hadn't ended well. He remembers telling one of the kinder nurses in the psych ward about his quirk. She had sweetly smiled at him. Izuku thought that she might have believed him. But the next day, the dose on his medication had been bumped up, and he was locked in his room for the rest of the week. Izuku didn't know if he would be able to handle being rejected again. It must have shown in his expression, as Monoma nodded without saying a word. Izuku took a deep breath, subconsciously grabbing onto Oboro's hand for support. "I have a very odd quirk. Nobody ever believed me when I told them, because it's impossible to prove, unless you have a copying power." Izuku took a deep breath and squeezed Oboro's hand. If the ghost was alive, he was sure there would be bones creaking. "I can see ghosts. I've been able to my entire life, but when I was younger I was falsely diagnosed with crookedness and schizophrenia, so nobody ever believes me when I tell them. If you want to make sure I'm not lying, just copy my quirk." Izuku held out his arm to let Monoma copy his power, something that seemed to surprise the other boy. Only hesitating a second, Monoma grazed his hand against Izuku's scattered arms. As soon as he made contact, Monoma's eyes locked onto Oboro and widened. The ghost waved, using the hand that wasn't still holding Izuku's own. "Hi," Oboro greeted, a cheesy grin spreading across his face. "The name's Shirakum Oboro. It's nice to meet you." He bowed as best as he could with the green tin latch onto him. "You can call me Monoma," the tall boy said, bowing ever so slightly in return. "I take it you're a ghost then?" He raised an eyebrow. "Yep," came Oboro's ever so chipper reply. "The friendliest ghost around." Izuku snorted. "That's not even an understatement. He's the only ghost I ever met that isn't on some sort of revenge plan. I think he's some sort of defect." Izuku's tone turned serious as he turned towards Monoma. I don't mind you copying my quirk, but I do have to warn you that most ghosts aren't as friendly as Oboro. I recommend pretending you can't see them, or else they might attack you. That's how I got this." Izuku pointed to a particularly hard scar on his sleeveless arm. It came from the top of his shoulder all the way down to the middle of his forearm. The scar was easy to spot, even without a starburst burn covering parts of it. "You're lucky, because you can just stop using the quirk wherever you'd like, but I'll still have to be careful." Izuku pulled his hand out of Oboro's grip so he could wipe his sweaty hands on his pants, giving the ghost full mobility again. "And don't tell anyone either. It doesn't matter what you do, they'll just think you're crazy and send you off to some psych ward. If you get sent there, I can't help you." Monoma raised an eyebrow at this. "You could tell people now. You've got me as proof." He pointed his thumb at his chest. Shaking his head, Izuku looked at Monoma with seriousness in his eyes. "Not happening. Nobody ever believed me. Showing up with somebody who has the same delusions that I do won't change a thing." Awkward silence filled the corridor. Oboro took this as an opportunity to speak up. "You guys should probably head to the cafeteria. Shinso's going to start looking if you don't meet him there in 5. I think he grabbed you something from lunch already, though." Monoma stared in fascination at Oboro's feet, which were slightly hovering above the ground. Izuku cleared his throat to get his attention. "If anyone asks, I'm quirkless. I promise you that if you tell someone, it will end badly, and not just for me." With that, he turned on his heels and began to make his way over to him and Shinso's meeting place, leaving the boy who had just his sword flipped upside down all by himself. And that's it for this episode. I don't know, I don't know why I like Monoma that much. I hated him when I watched the anime, but I don't know. And in some fanfics, I don't know. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And I will wish you a good night or day, and bye bye.